imposition of rates and minimum payments, adoption of fees and charges, and other consequential matters arising from the budget. I will officially open this evening's special council meeting at 7 p.m. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'll now move on to item 3, announcements from the presiding member, of which there are none. Number 4, attendance. This evening we have Councillor Maleka in attendance via electronic means. In accordance with Regulation 14C 2CI, I have authorised the attendance of Councillor Maleka by electronic means due to the increased level of COVID-19 in the community, this being consistent with Regulation 14C 2B. There are no other councillors on leave of absence this evening. All remaining councillors are present in the chamber. Are there any councillors who would like to apply for leave of absence? Any other leave? I'll put that, I'll need a mover. Councillor Palmer, I'll second it. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. Now move on to item 5, disclosures of interest. Are there any councillors who have an interest to disclose this evening? Councillor Ostaszewski.
Thank you. I have an interest to disclose in the budget. There is mention of the Morley Windmills Sports Club. I'm a member of the Morley Windmills Sports Club, and it's an impartiality interest.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also a social member of the Bayswater Bowls Club, which was mentioned in the budget, so that's an impartial interest, and I'll remain in the room.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I'm a social member of Bayswater Bowls Club and a member of Ellis House Arts Centre, which were mentioned in the report. Impartiality interest, I'll stay in the room.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
And the same item, so a member of various community groups across the district mentioned in the report, so stay in the room, it's impartial.
Thank you. Any other interests? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Maleka.
I'd also like to mention that I'm a member of Ellis House, so I'd like, it's an impartial interest and I'll stay in the room.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to item 6, public question time. Members of the gallery, I'll first call for questions on items on this evening's agenda. Please keep in mind that you are limited to 3 questions. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question regarding tonight's agenda? Hi, Mr. Lance. So I do have those questions. Would you like me to read them out?
Thanks, works. As long as they're included in the minutes and the responses, it's fine.
I'll just confirm with the CEO.
Yes, certainly, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Are there any other questions on this evening's agenda?
It's got to be on the agenda. It's got to do with the budget.
I'll just seek advice from the CEO if we're accepting questions about items not on the agenda.
Thank you, and through the chair, tonight's meeting is a special meeting, so any questions and business conducted at this meeting must be to do with the budget.
So I'll just ask if there are any questions on this evening's agenda from anyone else in the gallery.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, but you've skipped over deputations, I think.
Oh, I'll just go back. See. Oh, no, that's coming up next. Yes. So if there are no other questions, I'll close public question time. Just noting that we have received written questions from Mr. Lance and they will be published in the minutes. I'll now move on to item 7, presentations. Do councillors have any petitions to table this evening? No? There are no presentations. I'll now move on to deputations. And we have received one in relation to item 8.1. Mr. Warren Lance will be in attendance speaking on the item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Here we are again at budget night, and yes, I was a little disappointed that wasn't available publicly until Thursday night for a meeting on a Monday night. So it meant I spent quite a few hours over the weekend preparing the notes that I circulated to all councillors and copied it to the Minister. I got acknowledgements back from the Minister, both his personal email and his ministerial one. Not one comment back from a councillor, so I'm assuming everyone's a full bottle. However, there are some further observations on what's in the budget papers. It is difficult to get a full picture on what the city's financial position is because there is no balance sheet with those budget papers. There's lots of talk about what particular items are, but then it's repeated 3 or 4 times through the course of the work papers, and a lot of those figures don't agree with each other. I'm baffled. So in other words, for example, how much cash does the city hold as of the end of June 22? What's it proposed to hold at June 23? What are the investments they've got? What are the liabilities? What are the liabilities for staff? What haven't they paid their suppliers? What are the assets? There's lots of talk about different things, but none of them tally. And some of them are just repeated time and time again. So it's not the easiest document to follow, and it's very disappointing. Another comment, you keep talking about you're going to discuss the variance. The variance is allowed to be 10% or $50,000. Now think about it. If that's an item and it's $50,000 a month, so you can have a discrepancy or a difference of $600,000 over a year, no one has to explain anything. I can tell you commercially it's 1% or 10 grand per item. Things are a lot tighter than that, so it's just baffling. Okay. I just want to cover the Maylands Waterland. We were told there was 1.5 million sitting in cash in lieu, but the city's taken a loan out. So didn't they get the cash in lieu? Or have they spent it elsewhere? Or what? We've now got a debt of 1.5 million racking up interest. And I'm sorry, but Waterland should now be called grassland. It's a glorified playground with a pond, with all due respect. I'm baffled. There is mentioned at least 4, 5, 6 times in those budget papers of cash-backed reserves. Page 51, page 16, page 13, pages 50 to 56. And the numbers vary. They go from 28,863 up to 42,435, 294. What is the answer? I don't know how you guys can possibly approve a budget when you haven't got the info in front of you. And then some stuff is repeated 3, 4, 5 times. I mean, is this deliberately to not let you guys be informed? I'm baffled. I also don't quite understand what's happening with Bayswater Waves. You're talking about borrowing $7.1 million to spend $7.46 million on upgrading it. And the statement in there is that, 1, the discussion on it's going to be confidential, and there's visitations of 750,000 a year to Bayswater Waves. Do people realise that's an average of 2,060 people per day? Now, I'm sorry, I'd question that. I've driven past it plenty of times. I've never seen anything like 500 or 600 cars in that car park. And why is a discussion over that confidential? Because supposedly what? Getting paid back from revenue? Our revenue? Rates? What? So I'm disappointed at the standard of this, and yet you guys are all supposed to be sitting around debating whether you're going to approve this or not. Another classic example, Maylands underground power. You're going to borrow $7 million to put underground power in? Have you consulted the residents? Have you given them an idea of the cost to them, a time frame? And what's the reaction been? No mention of that in the budget. But you're talking about borrowing another 7 million, 7.1 for Bayswater Waves. You've already got debts of what, 4.5 million? Is this council going to be the one that runs up debts of round numbers, 20 million? And we're supposed to pay for it? Sorry, I am bitterly disappointed. That's all I'm going to say. I don't believe you can approve this. You don't have the right info, and I hope you guys do question it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. I'll just ask if there's any questions from councillors. No questions. Thank you very much for your deputation. The next item is delegates' reports, and there are none this evening. We now move on to item 8. Item 8.1, the 2022-23 budget. I'll be moving that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Maleka. Thank you. Tonight will be the first budget handed down during my time as Mayor of the City of Bayswater. I have to be honest, I've been charged with overseeing the preparation of this budget under less than ideal circumstances. The financial challenges we are currently facing are no secret. Indeed, this budget has been prepared and is being considered alongside Council dealing with legacy issues affecting our long-term financial position. I am committed to getting the city's finances back on track. I am committed to ensuring this budget and our long-term financial decisions do not burden the city's ratepayers who are already struggling with increased inflation, higher business costs, and a rising cost of living. The budget we have before us tonight is one that balances the need for the city to take steps towards financial sustainability without unfairly burdening ratepayers. This is a budget that protects our core services and prioritises maintenance of our ageing assets. Hard decisions have been made in pulling together this year's budget, and I stand behind them. Savings have been made by reducing the number of new projects, capping the number of new employees, and opting to no longer subsidise immunisations on behalf of the state government. I am mindful that cost of living pressures are causing financial distress for many as we face increases in the cost of food, petrol, utilities, rent and mortgages. And we are still recovering from the impact of COVID-19. Just like our ratepayers though, the city is faced with increases in the cost of fuel, electricity and water. These significantly impact our operations. Labour shortages, supply chain issues and price increases in the building and construction industry means it now costs more to maintain our ageing assets. This is a back to basics budget. It is not filled with a raft of new projects. This budget protects the core services our community rely upon while maintaining our assets. This year, we have kept the rate increase as low as possible at 4.95%. This is less than the national CPI of 5.1% and 35% less than the Perth CPI at 7.6%. 1% of the rates increase will be set aside so we can make the necessary future upgrades to our ageing assets. Our low rate in the dollar and low minimum rate means that in 2022-23, Bayswater ratepayers in residential areas will continue to enjoy one of the lowest levels of rating across the entire Perth metropolitan area. Our rate in the dollar is less than our neighbouring councils of Vincent, Swan and Bassendean. This budget puts money behind the services that are most needed by our community. Basic services such as rubbish and recycling collections, upgrading local roads and footpaths, and keeping our neighbourhoods safe with regular security patrols. This budget supports over 150 local community and sporting clubs by providing them with club rooms and buildings to operate out of. It funds the maintenance of our over 180 parks, ovals and open spaces, including 24 sporting ovals and 2 public golf courses. This budget provides facilities our community need, from the pool at Bayswater Waves and the public sports courts at the Rise, to our 3 libraries and 2 community centres. These facilities are used by all ages and abilities. That is why this year we will borrow $7.14 million to complete the upgrade of Bayswater Waves. With over 750,000 visits each year, it is used by older residents, hosts 3,000 swim school students each week, 80 school swimming carnivals a year, and caters for special needs groups. This budget will fund the reconfiguration of the Bayswater Waves foyer to improve accessibility and expand the group fitness area. It will also pay for the refurbishment of the popular wave pool. Borrowing the funds will enable us to complete the upgrades without burdening our ratepayers. This facility is important to our community, and our community deserve a facility that caters to their needs. This council is keen to encourage investment in the city that will make it a more vibrant and livable place to live, work and visit. This budget will fund the rollout of the city's interim economic development strategy that will see a renewed focus on the attraction of new development and the continued support for local businesses. Actively pursuing commercial and residential investment in areas such as the Morley Activity Centre will relieve the rates burden on families and make the city more financially sustainable in the longer term. This budget will ensure the city is well positioned to capitalise on opportunities presented by the state government's investment in major road and rail projects. It also allows for the construction of underground power in a large portion of Maylands next year. In this difficult economic climate, it is important we work hard to leverage revenue from other sources. I am proud that in my term as Mayor, the city has been able to secure over $3 million in election funding commitments from the federal government. This budget supports our advocacy efforts, and I want to assure you that I will continue to proactively seek out funding for infrastructure projects, sustainable initiatives, and innovative projects that will improve the lives of our community. This budget allocates $30,000 towards the development of a new citywide community safety and crime prevention plan. The plan will include practical actions aimed at improving safety, service delivery, and reducing crime within the community. Council has committed $49,000 in this budget towards the continued rollout of its emissions reduction and renewable energy plan. As part of our commitment to mitigating climate change as we move towards net zero emissions in our operations, we have also installed solar panels and LED lighting across city and community buildings. This budget provides over $220,000 in grant funding to environmental, sporting and community groups. This includes community capital grants that provide accessibility improvements or upgrades to community facilities, better Bayswater grants that make our city a better place to live, community event grants that bring people together, and donations to charitable organisations. This budget contributes to the city's vision for a strong and inclusive community. This budget allocates $242,000 towards a range of popular community events that add vibrancy to our city. They include the Avon Descent Finish Line Festival, Community Art Awards, as well as a raft of concerts and music in the park and carols by candlelight. $46,000 will fund the continued rollout of the homelessness strategy to support those most vulnerable in our community. I am mindful that more work will still need to be done to repair the city's finances, and that this will take time and continued financial restraint. I am, however, confident this budget delivers the services the community needs in a financially responsible way without unnecessarily burdening our ratepayers. I would like to thank councillors, the staff and leadership team at the city for all their hard work in putting this together. Councillor Maleka?
Okay, so I'd like to say that this budget we have before us sets us on a road of recovery. It's a budget that speaks to the community, the residents and ratepayers, I agree with what the Mayor has just said, with a back to basics priority. The highlights for me include a maintenance and upgrading of existing green spaces, roads, footpaths and amenities, a sensible number of key events for multi-generational community engagement, development of a community plan and crime prevention plan. All in all, it's a responsible budget during this economically challenging time. It safeguards and it protects. It protects our core services, yet continues a financially sustainable future. Thanks.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak against? Councillor Johnston?
I'd like to propose an amendment, please.
Have you provided the amendment to the city? I'll just ask the minute taker if they can put it on the screen.
Would you like me to read them out?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm proposing the two additions to the items in the budget, and one is a budget adjustment of $120,000 be approved to continue providing immunisation clinics and the school-based immunisation program for the entire financial year, and this amount to be funded by, I don't know what words to put in there. And also the by muni rates, I guess. In addition, and also a budget adjustment of $50,000 for the preparation of an implementation plan for the environment and livability framework, to be funded by perhaps an offset of something else in the capital budget, maybe the Horton Reserve Park. Sorry.
Did you want to seek some advice from
thank you.
the director?
That would be great, thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, obviously there's a variety of ways to fund this, so it could either be through a rate increase, a deficit budget, a reduction in expenditure, but the simplest way would be via reserves. So we reassign some reserves to a project, so that frees up some money to allocate to these both of these amendments if they're passed.
Do we have reserves that would be appropriate for this expenditure?
Through the chair, we have, as you know, in the budget, we've budgeted for an ERP, an enterprise resource planning solution. There is a reserve that we haven't utilised of about 200,000 in that. We could allocate that to the ERP and then utilise the remaining budget required for these from the Muni Fund. So yes, in answer to your question, yes.
Okay, thank you. So what would the appropriate words be then to insert in this gap?
Through the chair, we've just sent them to the minute taker.
I'll just ask the minute taker to provide them on the screen. So as that's happening, just to be clear, it's to fund it from reserves.
Sure.
Yes. I'll just see if there's a seconder. Councillor Clark, second. Oh, sorry. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Palmer seconding. Councillor Johnson, would you like to speak?
If I might. Thank you, Mayor. These items were, well, immunisation was removed from the budget through the process. I note it says in the report that this was done, let me find the words.
Sorry, just before you continue, I'll just see, is this visible to Councillor Maleka? What's on the screen? Just want to make sure she can see. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I proceed?
Yes.
Thank you. In the report it says, following feedback from councillors, the city will cease providing immunisation clinics. I didn't provide that feedback, so I definitely don't want anyone to think that I was supportive of that through the process. Immunisation is such a key part of our public health. It's an action, it's a key action in our public health plan. We provide immunisation to babies at our infant health clinics and other members of the community, and we provide immunisation through the school-based funding system. Now, we definitely have heard through the process that the gap between what the state and federal government contribute towards this has slipped, and the city has been subsidising this program. However, we also understand that this is going to be renegotiated, and I fear that the risk is if we don't fund immunisation in this year, that we won't go back to it. It just leaves so many people vulnerable who wouldn't otherwise get immunisation. We have a lot of people in our community that are referred to this service. It's a really important part of their public health, and it's going to reduce preventable disease in some of our most vulnerable communities, and they're not necessarily landholders. There are a lot of low-income people in our city who go to the infant health centres and get the immunisation, but they also get other support from our nurses. I know in our schools, busy parents are not going to run around and get their teenagers immunised necessarily. It's a big gap. It's so easy for it to be done at school, and I think it's just such good value. This is a couple of dollars on a rates bill to support this, and my understanding is it's just a temporary support and this will be renegotiated next year. So I definitely ask councillors to really consider the most vulnerable in our community before and to support the immunisation program in our community. With regard to the environment and livability framework, council supported this unanimously just in April of this year. This is a report that was done with collaboration and a long-term focus to talk about how the city can respond to the challenges and opportunities of climate change. We were asked, what wasn't included in the budget was $50,000 to do the implementation plan for this project. Without the implementation project plan, this project will die. It's a project that will create intergenerational equity and huge value for money, I think, for our community and for the services that we deliver in the way that we can do them better and help us build a better quality future and lifestyle and environment for all of our residents. It's $50,000. It sounds like a lot. Like, it sounds like a lot, but in the frame of our budget, it's a tiny proportion that would increase our rates if we were to do it that way by 1/10 of 1%, making a tiny difference to our rates. And I just think they're the things that are not in this budget that I think will make a big difference. And I ask for the councillors to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I support this indeed. I feel that we are in a state of immunisation needed everywhere, and for us to minimise this at this stage of COVID and everything else that's happening, and all the other diseases that are reoccurring, all these children's illnesses that are starting to bounce back, we really need to step forward. And I thank Councillor Georgia Johnston for raising this awareness, and also on the ELF situation as well. It is a minuscule amount compared to what we're actually doing throughout. My sad state is that I would love to have seen podiatry stay in. That was only $20,000, but that's been sort of drawn, so we have to sacrifice throughout the budget. But I do believe that the immunisation is of paramount importance. This is people, and we are very worthy of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak against?
I wanted to speak in favour of the
I'll
amendment.
just ask if there's anyone against. Anyone for?
Yes, thanks.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Johnston for moving this amendment. I agree with the comment on page 14 of the agenda. It says, following feedback from councillors, I was not one of the councillors that advocated for cutting immunisations. I find it, I'm actually quite flabbergasted. It came through quite late in the piece. We have just gone through 2 years of COVID and restrictions and trying to get everyone immunised for COVID, that we would then turn around and cut one of our most basic health services, I find really abhorrent. It is not a value that I support. For those who aren't aware, the city provides, it's very easy to say, oh, it should be done by the state government, but when you actually look really closely at how the program is delivered, it makes it much easier for families on the ground who've just had new babies to get their babies immunised, and it also immunises Year 7 and Year 10 school students in schools. So everyone throughout COVID has told me stories of remembering lining up, in their primary school or their secondary school and getting polio, for example, polio vaccines. And there wasn't the debate that we've had over the last 2 years about immunisations. Everyone just got their polio vaccine. So what this does is it covers a range of things. I got a list of the full vaccinations: diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, which is making a comeback amongst babies because of lack of coverage and immunisation, polio, measles, mumps and rubella, hepatitis B, chickenpox, influenza and meningococcal, a number of meningococcal diseases. The city immunises approximately 750 to 1,000 infants throughout 5 baby health clinics that are based in Bayswater, Maylands, Morley, Hampton Park Health Centre and Naranda. And they also immunise approximately 1,800 to 2,000 students through the school program. There's a number of staff that are associated with the city that do this, and so to turn around and say, oh, this just could be funded by the state government, fails to understand how it's actually delivered and how easy it is. So that it's just an open clinic, people walk in, you don't need a booking, a bit like what we're trying to get everyone to do with their 4th COVID vaccine at the moment, and people have coverage. So I think it's really important. It contributes to why the area has had such high immunisation rates in these sorts of diseases in the past. And it's something that I think this council should continue to do. Whether or not then we need to seek additional funds, that's fine. That is part of an overarching advocacy strategy. But I think the delivery model is one that I have never heard a complaint in my time on council about. And the easier we make this, the more that we make it incredibly accessible. It's all very well to say, oh, you can go to a GP and get it. Well, if you can get in to a non-bulk billed GP and not pay $90 for the privilege, then that's fine. But there's lots of people who necessarily would not automatically go and do that. And so having it as part of a baby health clinic system and having it as part of a school-run vaccination program, I think is the best way of building up that coverage. So I'd encourage councillors to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Would anyone like to speak against? Councillor Peterson-Pick. Oh, sorry, Councillor Eason.
Just a few questions, if I could, that's all. What other councils have immunisation programs?
I'll go to the director.
Through the chair, there's about 4 or 5 councils. I'm not sure whether the manager of environmental health can respond. He's in the other room. I'm not sure whether he can come in to respond to those questions.
We'll just wait for the manager.
Through the chair, we're aware that there's 3 other local governments that are still providing that service.
No worries. And are these services available elsewhere? So I heard Councillor Clark talk about at the GP. I'm sure that's where our children have been done.
That's correct. So there are immunisations available through GPs and also through the state immunisation centre in the city.
Okay. And sorry, just last one, is there any cost for that service?
Through the chair, sorry, the service provided.
Yeah, so if they were to go to a GP or the clinic to get it done, the state's clinic, is there any cost for that?
Through the chair, there's no cost through the state immunisation centre, but there would be consultation cost to go to a GP and have that done.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Peterson-Pick.
Just a few quick comments. Look, I'm also not one of those councillors who ask for that to be dealt with and removed from this budget. I think it is not the appropriate place to discuss it tonight. It was not discussed, as far as I know, in any of the workshops that we had. Just several days ago, we heard about it for the first time. I think there is merit to have a separate discussion about this with all the information. I would have loved to see a proper report about any item and significant change like this one, so I can have all the information. I had actually new figures now from Councillor Clark. Thank you for that. I wasn't aware of that, and I am a bit confused, I must say. I think we should have received the report. I don't think we should make big changes like this one in the budget. Definitely, it was worth discussing it in a workshop, so we all have the opportunity to ask more questions. I will leave it with that for now.
Thank you. I just have a question for the director. Can you please confirm whether this was discussed at workshops prior to this week?
Through the chair, yes, I believe it was discussed at the very first workshop we had, and then there were a number of questions during the period of time where it was responded to in those questions that were circulated to councillors.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? You have a question?
Yeah, follow-up question if I can. There was any conclusion at that workshop that we are going to remove, or there is a proposal on the table to remove the immunisation clinics? Because I attended that workshop and I do not remember discussion about that.
Through the chair, yes. I believe from those workshops there was a general, general consensus that the programme would be removed.
At the workshop?
Yeah.
At the first workshop?
I think it was the first workshop. It possibly was the second. I know we've had a number of workshops, but I do recall it was also, as I mentioned, it was also questioned through those questions and answers we sent out possibly 6 weeks ago, and it was identified there as well as an option.
Would anyone like to speak for?
Actually, Mayor, can I just clarify? I thought the status of our workshops were that they were confidential workshops. So again, once again, we've got an issue around what is confidential, what isn't. So I would never repeat what had been said in a workshop in this forum. Going forwards, I actually think this council needs to consider that they just become public forums if we're going to do that in this fashion.
Thank you for your comment.
The question, I'd like some information about what is the status of
So-
all of the discussions in the confidential workshops that we had that were all marked up as confidential documents as well.
So I'll ask the CEO, does that also include how when councillors say they weren't one who had that general consensus, is that also confidential?
Through the chair, the general rule is, and I've said this before, that any discussions at a workshop ought to be treated as confidential unless the council determines otherwise, because it's not a decision-making opportunity. It is there for exchanging views and information. And in the case of budget workshops, they are primarily used to build up the content of the budget over time.
Thank you. Would anyone, Councillor Palmer, you seconded the amendment.
Just want to respond to the confidentiality that we've just discussed.
I think the CEO's just responded. Would anyone like to speak for Councillor Bull?
Can I just ask a follow-up question? When were these two? Sorry, when was immunisation taken out of the draft budget?
I'll go to the director.
Through the chair, I believe when we were finalising all of the content, it would have been after the workshop of the 29th of June.
Just so I understand, because I wasn't at the first workshop, so I don't know what was discussed at that. I couldn't make it. But between whatever was discussed at the first workshop around immunisation all the way through till the most recent workshop, it still formed part of the budget, and then something happened between the last workshop and tonight where it was taken out of the budget. Is that right?
Through the chair, can you just give me a moment? I'm just going to double check that date for you so I give you the right answer. Through the chair, I'm also now very conscious of confidentiality. So not sure how much you want me to respond in terms of the ins and outs of those workshops, but it was discussed at the workshop on the 7th of June. And it was listed as an option.
Thank you.
Feedback from councillors.
Would anyone like to speak for the amendment? No? I'll just say that in regards to these two items, I think we come back to the fundamental issue. To continue to subsidise immunisations, which are not solely for the ratepayers of Bayswater, and it really is a state government responsibility, as well as to add in new projects, we need to cut something else or increase the rates. Tapping into reserves in a budget that's trying to build them up again isn't the way to go. There needed to be something cut rather than just simply spending more. So I think if you take the budget as a whole, yes, this might be small, but if you include every small measure, you get a big impact to the bottom line. And I think I'm not comfortable in dipping into reserves to support this. So I won't be supporting it. I'll go to the mover to close of the amendment, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to suggest cuts to it if you would like. If it's too late in the process, then I'm happy to have that considered at a mid-year budget review. But these are the things. these are the things that the budget's missing for me. I think immunisation, you know, we've heard about the value of immunisation in terms of getting our GPs refer our residents to the immunisation clinics because they know they can get a good quality, affordable service. So many people will not go to the GP to get their immunisations. They can't get appointments, they can't afford them. Healthcare is, you know, we hear every day like the demands on healthcare. Our immunisation services are a way for, you know, mums and their babies to access healthcare in our infant health centres. Sure, you can head off to, it used to be Viola Street if you want to get a free immunisation, but that is a big barrier for people. I think the immunisation service is just such good value, and like I said, I'm happy to find cuts and have that included in a mid-year budget review if that's what you would like to do. And the environment livability framework, I just, you know, can't emphasise enough how coordinating all the things we do across the city to prepare for the impact of climate change is just going to add so much value to everything we do. I ask for your support.
Thank you.
Separately, please.
No, I'm putting it as one. So we'll be voting on the amendment at the moment, which is the 2 limbs. I'll just ask if it's on the screen. Yep. Okay. So I'll put this now to the vote, the amendment. All those in favour? That's Councillor Palmer, Councillor Peterson-Pick, Councillor Bull, Councillor Clark, Councillor Johnson. All those against? Councillor Maleka, Councillor Ostaszowski, Councillor Eveson, Councillor Sutherland, Deputy Mayor and myself. That is lost. So councillors, we now go back to the substantive motion. Do I have someone who would like to speak against?
Sorry, just to clarify, the substantive motion as in the rest of the entire budget?
The officer's recommendation.
The entire budget? Sorry, the budget, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to speak against.
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Where to begin? There's a lot that people won't like about this budget. There's a lot not to like about it. First of all, the process has been terrible this year. First, it started with a wonderful headline that made it look like the city had been in the red for years. That was as a result of leaking confidential material that related to the long-term financial plans that the city was developing. I think that was really unhelpful, as well as probably being a breach of the Act. It meant that there was absolutely then very little trust between councillors going forward, because anything that was said in a confidential space could end up on the front page of a newspaper. So that's the first thing. The process has not been great this year. The second thing is we have proposed $14 million worth of debt and new loans, $11 million worth of carry forwards, and we're more than $2 million in higher expenditure than the income that's coming in. Now, it's all very well and good to say that these are somehow resulting from legacy issues and putting us back on a road to recovery. I think that is unfair and not true based in how this council has budgeted for the last 5 years since I've sat on council in 2017. What has changed this year is inflation is very high and employee costs are increasing for a range of reasons. And particularly in relation to capital works, those capital costs have gone up significantly. So that is why we have had to look at rate increases that are higher than what we have done in previous years. And in previous years, we have looked at the COVID situation and we have gone relatively low to help households with COVID. So I just think at the end of the day, we look at these things year on year. I would like to see a long-term financial plan. I've been asking for one since I was elected and for it to be updated, but we haven't seemed to get there. And the problem I have with this budget, when you actually break it down into, various bits and pieces, is that I wanted to see more in relation to the environment, more in relation to homelessness, more in relation to reconciliation. I wanted to see deliberative budgeting in there so that we can actually talk to people about where their rates are spent. And that has been, taken out, which I always said would be the failure of something like deliberative budgeting. But it also doesn't prepare us for a post-COVID recovery for local businesses in a way that I would have liked to have seen. Instead, it favours a very broad idea about economic development. It reduces the placemakers that we have around the areas, which I wanted to see increased, particularly around Bedford. So I'm struggling to find reasons to vote for this tonight, but I'm happy to be convinced by those around the table. So it has this very broad idea around economic development, but we're not really then looking at things around COVID contingencies, environmental measures, community engagement, improving governance, improving work health and safety based on new laws in WA. In fact, what it does is it cuts immunisations. After 2 years of COVID, I cannot vote for a budget that cuts immunisations. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, councillor. Would anyone like to speak for? Anyone against? Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really echo the few last words that Councillor Lorna Clark has said about the fact that we have investment in monies here, but the main thing is our own health of our community, and we've said a no to that. And also, I was really sacrificing the fact that podiatry is also being sacrificed and is not there for our community. I do believe that, yeah, you can get it anywhere else, but I'm sorry, but this podiatry was just as important as the immunisation. So for that reason, I can't support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Anyone speaking for? Anyone against? Councillor Bull.
Thanks. Firstly, a large and significant thank you to the Director, Corporate and Strategy, and to her small but superpowered team. To prepare a budget in this current economic climate would be challenging at the best of times, let alone with the extraneous headwinds you have been exposed to. I sincerely, personally appreciate your commitment to our district. Thank you. That being said, from my point of view, this has been probably the most bizarre budget process I have ever been involved in. Difficult, frustrating, bizarre. This is because for a budget process to run efficiently requires serious trust. Trust that was wiped away by someone who decided to leak an extremely early draft budget. So what these events resulted in was an environment where I believe no one could have the confidence to engage in the budget workshop process meaningfully for want of risking more information being leaked and the enduring consequences of that. So what we are left with is a budget that reflects the economic circumstances of the day. It raises rates, but it does not really deliver while actually making significant strategic decisions with little discussion. Some things that are not funded under this budget that I can tell include town centre events, destination marketing strategy, implementation, major review of the strategic community plan, our environment and livability framework implementation, natural area improvement programs, river foreshore restoration programs, Hillcrest revegetation, citywide streetscape enhancement, immunisations, podiatry, and placemaking for Bedford. However, from what I can tell, there is $1.2 million worth of road resurfacing above the federal grants that we get year on year. That's $1.2 million of municipal funds, while at the same time funding significantly less on footpaths, for example. And instead of funding the Burkett Street Reserve redevelopment or the Ferridy Street Reserve redevelopment, Funds that would have been used for this will now be directed to a park critical assets account, effectively changing a years-long approach to playground asset renewal without council formally considering the strategic implementations, let alone having a discussion about it. In fact, moving funding away from placemaking, environmental restoration, footpaths, podiatry and vaccinations all bake in a strategic shift without council properly considering their implementations by formal reports, council debate and council decisions, and impacts potentially the most vulnerable in our community as a result. And this is why participatory budgeting is so powerful, because before big strategic impacts affected by changes in budget line items occur, we ask the community if they are the changes they want to see. And here tonight, the effect of this budget is to make big strategic changes without consultation. I feel saddened by where we are. However, on this basis, amongst others, this is not a budget I can support.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak for? Councillor Eason.
These are some very difficult times for planning and projecting financially. This financial year 23, my first budget as a councillor, has been a process more eye-opening than I expected, and this is even before external economic conditions needed to be considered. When still in the midst of a pandemic, now compounded as economies continue grappling to recover from 2 years of economic losses and financial freezes. We're now seeing the squeeze generated as markets make up for lost time and revenue as a result. In short, inflation and cost pressures are across the board, and they are quite severe. With the highest inflation in the country, WA is in tough times, and local government is not immune to these cost pressures. And after 6 workshops, hundreds of questions, clarifications, and multiple budget versions, I'm confident the process and outcome has been robust. So whilst councillors may speak of what this budget is not, I'm going to speak about what this budget is. So this budget is the first step towards a sustainable economic future, a more responsible and balanced approach that protects core services the community relies on without unnecessarily burdening ratepayers. Our ageing assets receive much needed maintenance with a 1% total rate contribution that tackles maintenance debt and ensures vast numbers of clubs and groups continue to enrich our community life. This budget continues to deliver on our environmental commitments whilst also investing in much needed economic development, seeking the huge potential that both will deliver, improving vibrancy and livability, which in turn generates much needed local employment and flow on of revenue, increasing prosperity for the community, not just in our town centres, but our heavily underutilised industrial land as well. This budget utilises borrowing to continue upgrade of the highly used Bayswater waves, locking in a low interest rate and ensuring better intergenerational equity for those in the community right now. It also relieves operational budgets being spent propping up waves as reserves slowly build. This budget considers the $3 million in election commitments made to our district and focuses staff on delivering those key projects rather than juggling new ones, relieving financial pressure on ratepayers and a backlog of future projects that congest our long-term plans. This budget funds a much-needed revision of our crime plan, identifying technology upgrades and delivering practical solutions that will boost efficiency of staff resources so that they can be out in our community, visible and present, deterring crime and supporting the police. I've seen many improvements made to this budget through the series of workshops, a result of excellent collaboration between councillors and staff, a healthy tension that challenged the status quo, revisited assumptions, tweaked contingencies. It's been a mixed bag, but the result, I feel, has been worth it. This budget is a sensible compromise that protects core services and strikes the right balance in very difficult times. It's fair dinkum, it's honest, and it's pragmatic. I'd encourage councillors to consider my points and to vote to what's on the table.
Thank you. Anyone speaking against? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, in a perfect world, we would be told we'd set the budget by doing our strategic community plan, having a corporate business plan, our long-term financial plan, and then slicing it up year by year, and there's our budget good to go. And divide that by the number of households, and there's your rates. I'm really sorry this process wasn't like that. we're in a position where it's changed rapidly. Our economic environment has changed rapidly since we started this budget process. We've got increases that you've all talked about in terms of our core stuff, workers' compensation, superannuation, a tiny increase to wages that's mandated under EBA, insurance, utilities. Like, we all know prices are going up. Mayor, you said that this budget, this proposes a rate increase of less than the national CPI, less than the Perth CPI, less rate in the dollar than many of our neighbouring councils. I think that, to me, is the essence of unsustainability. We've had very low rate increases over the last few years that I supported, rightfully so. It was a time of great uncertainty. But now we're left with a situation where I think this budget is not balanced, like it says in the report. It's a $2 million deficit budget. It's a rate increase that's not sustainable. And it does include new projects, includes $1 million of new initiatives, includes $2 million in roads, but so many cuts since we started, cuts to things that I think are really important to our community. Councillor Bull mentioned a number of the cuts, so I won't reiterate them. I won't talk about what went on in the workshops at all, but there's so many cuts all the way through. I call this the death by 1,000 cuts budget, because I really feel like we're left with a situation where we've just got no room to move to do all of the great things that we want to do to support the strategies we've already adopted, to support the plans we already have in place. It would be a tiny increase to people's rates to actually support the strategies that we've already adopted. So I'm really struggling without the items that are proposed, including the budget. I'm really struggling to support it. I'd love to be convinced.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor, speaking.
Just a question.
A question?
Yeah, just sorry. Just a question through the chair to the director in regards to something that Councillor Johnston just mentioned, if I may. If I could seek comment on the $2 million deficit budget.
I'll go to the director.
Through the chair, so the budget that presented to you is a balanced budget. So if you look at the rate setting statement, which is the collection of all the income, revenue, expenditure, etc., capital and operating expenditure, that is balanced, a zero balanced budget. I think you may be referring to the statement of comprehensive income, which is a different statement, and that's impacted by the underground power project, which in the accounting treatment for it. But the important thing for you as councillors to consider is the rate setting statement, which is balanced.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer, question?
Yes, on page 8, it has adjusted net current assets at the end of the year, and in brackets it's got 2.956611. So I think from what's the same, it's hard to speak because it's under confidentiality of a budget workshop. So there it was. Thank you.
Would anyone like to speak against the budget? Councillor Peterson,
Thank you. Yes, I would like to speak against. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also echo the thank yous to the staff and the finance team and all the teams, because I know it's a joint effort behind the scenes. And it was, I think, a unique process this year. This is what I felt. So thank you. As we all know, every budget includes positive proposals and negative ones. Like every, I personally am trying to balance everything and assess whether there is merit in supporting the proposed budget with all of its components or not. As we already heard tonight, those who are considering supporting the budget will highlight all the positives. However, I would like to mention my concerns, which are a bit different to what we heard already, and many of them I raised during the work on the budget and beforehand. Firstly, and that is a significant one for me, the budget proposes taking a new loan for Bayswater Waves. Without having a long-term financial plan that clearly shows that we can't pay out this new loan, it is a risk that I'm deeply concerned about. Last year, Council already committed to a $4 million loan, which also includes funding for Bayswater Waves. We are now considering additional $7.1 million with an increased interest rate of 5.5%, which is much higher than the interest rate that was approved for last year's loan. The original plan was to fund the refurbishment over 10 years. Suddenly, we are shrinking the timeframes significantly. The City of Vincent received a federal government grant of $471,000 for Beatty Park redevelopment. We received none from both the federal government and state government, even though we are talking about a project which will cost us much more than $10 million. So why are we rushing into taking this loan now? If we do it, we would be significantly reducing our chances of getting some significant funding assistance, as we will show that we can manage without the state and federal government assistance. We also got nothing from the state government for Waterland. No funding was given for an underpass at Caledonian Avenue, despite the mess that they created. We should mingle less and lobby hard, as this project deserves contribution from the state government. They are the ones with a massive surplus. I also want to note my concerns, and we had it early this meeting, about the city's decision to classify the business plan as confidential as part of tonight's agenda. I believe that it should have been fully or partially shared with our community so that everyone can have access to the same information, or at least part of it. We are talking about an additional $7.1 million loan, so we should not hide anything. And I would like to remind Council that we once used to be a debt-free council. Inflicting a 5% rate increase on our ratepayers, and in particular on those who pay minimum rates at this time, is something that I also have significant concerns with. As I indicated my view at the first workshop that was held, all costs go up at the moment, but it doesn't mean that we need to do the same and create another significant burden on them. This is the time to be truly frugal. A 5% increase is not a satisfactory outcome, especially in relation to those, as I said, who struggle the most. Bassendean, I heard them, as just one example, recently decided to keep their minimum rate unchanged. We are proposing a 5% increase. The CPI is only one indicator out of many to determine the appropriate rate increase. The fact that the proposed rate increase is below CPI is not always a sufficient justification in my view. Our ratepayers' salaries did not rise by 7.6% this year. I can promise you that. They also did not rise by 5%. I'm also mindful that many ratepayers in Mainland specifically will be hit with an additional charge at some point to pay for the installation of new underground power. For many property owners, it will be a significant amount, and that is in addition to the proposed rate increase. This is not something that happens every year. Now I head back to the basics. So $25,000 have been allocated here for a perception study to find out what the public thinks about various issues. Is this essential for this year? We already collected enough feedback from our ratepayers through so many consultation processes recently, including for our new strategic community plan. $40,000 funding for religious-based chaplaincy programs for schools. I already raised this issue with the city. Do we have the money for these sort of things? Why are we providing funding to schools? Isn't that the Department of Education role? $35,000 for a new skate BMX park strategy. It's nice. But only last month we discussed the new pump track that is being proposed under the Tonkin Highway Bridge and fully funded by the Tonkin Gap Alliance for 5 years. We are building a new skate park and BMX dirt jumps at Wharton Reserve at the moment. Is it essential to progress with this strategy now, knowing the financial difficulties, as we heard, that we are in? Do we have the money for more projects of these sorts? What is the point to have strategy if we do not have the money to implement the actions? And I also want to note that $35,000 are not going into refurbishing one of our existing skating parks. They are going into a strategy. Look, I have more examples here, but the list goes on, and residents can go through it by themselves in the budget papers, noting that unfortunately it is only a partial detailed list of the planned expenses, as a lot of the operational expenses are not provided in detail. Also, and I do echo some of the comments that were already made, some important items were left out while others are in, and the list is there. I am also disappointed that this year, for the first time, we only received a few days to review the final draft and consider all aspects. Only an hour ago, we received responses to some new queries arising as part of the preparation for this meeting. And I know that the financial team has done the best job this year, so I know that it is not their fault. More concerning to me is that the public received only a few days to look at it, which is not what I would expect from our council. Moreover, as also was mentioned before, no public comment period is being proposed here, even though we are talking about the biggest rate increase for a long time and increasing our debt by $7.1 million. If we do consult about issues such as the operation of our libraries, I would think that we should also give the community a chance to provide comments, if they have any, about this type of big issues, so that the council can be confident that it is on the right track indeed. It's not unique. We previously did that. The city of Vincent, I had Vincent as an example, they also did that. Why this is not mentioned? Just recently they did that as well. I will finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak for? Councillor Sutherland.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I would also like to thank the officers for their time and patience in setting this budget. In this climate, it hasn't been easy, and I'd like to personally thank them for all my questions and queries, so thank you. I also would like to just quickly add that I don't think this budget's been, the process has been bizarre or disappointing. I've thought it's been efficient, and I've been on the council since 2013, so I just want to say that it has been pretty efficient, the process. I also think that there's no doubt that it's been difficult to set a budget in this climate. The cost of living pressures that have just sort of come out of nowhere, over obviously what's happening in Europe with the energy crisis and the end of COVID, has hit all facets of society. Even the state government, who are sitting on a huge pile of money due to our iron ore and mining boom, have put up all their charges. Vehicle licence fees 3.8%, driver's licence fee 6.4%, electricity charges 2.5%, water charges 2.5%, and the emergency levy, which we have to pay, we have to collect on their behalf. And they're sitting on billions of dollars worth of a profit, but they put their charges up. So it's obviously biting into their bottom line as well. And we're balancing our budget against an inflation rate of just over 7% in WA. Also, as we're in a mining boom, and WA is always a boom or bust state, we've got a limited labour pool. It's difficult to get quality staff, and we must attract good staff with a satisfactory remuneration. Looking at the loans, I do echo some of the concerns that people have raised about these. I've sort of thought a couple of years ago that we probably should have bought loans when interest rates were low. But anyway, it is what it is now. We've got to accept that we've got ageing assets. Whatever you think about Bayswater Ways, it does give us the ratepayers, and not just the ratepayers, but the community, a vital service. I go down there regularly, and I can see that all sorts of people recovering from injuries and operations, etc., use that pool. And I think it's very important that we keep ageing assets up and running. The money spent on crime, the prevention of crime is important. A few months ago, we had a crime prevention meeting at Morley, at the Morley Rec Centre, and it is a huge issue. And not talking about, people running around with guns and that, but just low-level crime, people breaking, entering, stealing things. It is an issue for the whole district. So I do think we need to be proactive and spend money on that. I'm happy that we're spending money on underground power. And again, I take into account what the other councillors have said about that. I know myself, I put up a motion several years ago to bring that on in Morley, but I do think the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term pain for that. I feel we should put more pressure on the state government for environmental initiatives. As we've all seen, MetroNet has caused a massive impact on our on trees, And I do not understand why in all their planning, and been a lot of planning for Metronet, that's what we've heard for several years, how they couldn't put a bit of money aside to give us to put more trees and vegetation in where they've lost. And it should be something, if the government's going to put infrastructure in, they should be giving council money to put more vegetation in. I feel we have to stick to our core business services. Immunisation is important, podiatry is important, but it is not the core. In a perfect world, we could do all of that, but we just don't have the money to do that. And so I'm happy with the budget as it is. Again, we could spend more money on the environment and reconciliation, but really, if the state and federal government need to step up with this, and we're a council, a small council, we're doing as much as we can on a budget that we really don't have money to contribute in that field, in my opinion. So in the overall, I'm mindful that we have a budget hole, I suppose, and we need to be financially sustainable for the future. So I encourage councillors to support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sutherland. Deputy Mayor.
Before I comment on the good outcomes with this budget, I feel it's important to reflect on the long-term financial plan and the city's use of borrowings. The city currently has a long-term financial plan set out 2018 to 2027, which outlined a sustainable and responsible financial roadmap for the city's future until 2026. It included initial 4.9% first-year rate setting and subsequent 3.5 settings each year after. While the plan is well overdue for a review as a 10-year rolling plan, it's telling to note the council only implemented the first 2 of 10 stages of that plan before deviating away from its goals. This has compounded how far off course we were. What's the purpose of a plan if you aren't willing to stick to it? While no one predicted the pandemic and our response of a 0% rate revenue rise and a $5.09 million in capital works brought forward helped cushion the effects, it was never going to be sustainable and it was always going to have a price to pay. Regarding the use of debt, I thank the acting CEO for taking the time at a budget workshop to go through this specifically and so that I could better understand the principles of intergenerational equity. While I've spoken in the past against the use of loans, I've also seen this lack of our commitment to a project deliver drawn out and costly outcomes. What this highlights to me is that we can't continue to string out Bayswater waves. In breaking this project down into stages, it has cost us more and taken us far longer than it should have. Efficient use of debt to deliver projects of value to the community can be possible and beneficial, provided we stick to our financial plan. All this has had an effect on our city, compounded with very high inflation in WA, particularly, supply issues, increases in costs for labour, materials and contracts, all adding to the challenge of bringing us back in line. It is incumbent on every councillor to account for the long-term financial viability of council and to fully engage with its process. I look forward to working with my fellow councillors and our new CEO on updating our long-term financial plans soon. Now, I want to get on to the good in this budget, and I feel that this budget does have good outcomes. In the budget, I'm going to name some figures, and they do include some grant and funding amounts, and I'll start with $3 million of election funding commitments from the federal government. Nearly $730,000 to reduce the impact of climate change at a local level, and this includes $90,000 in emission reduction and renewable energy planning and implementation, and $539,000 in LED light changes. $2.4 million for tree planting, $2.7 million in environmental initiatives, $1 million for the Tranby foreshore restoration, $7 million for the Mayland State Underground Power Program, nearly $370,000 for Gibney Reserve redevelopment, $584,000 for the Maylands Lakes, a further 179,000 for Maylands Waterland, and 31.5 million of capital works which are asset renewal projects. These are significant investments and opportunities for the community and for the city to deliver. I do feel this budget strikes a responsible balance between protecting our core services and maintaining our ageing assets, but it's also being mindful of financial pressures in our community and keeping rates in check. We can sit here and we can blame past councils for not future-proofing and planning adequately for the future, or we can just get on and fix it. This budget has to take steps toward recovery from the past while being financially responsible for the future, and this is why I'm supporting the budget this year.
Thank you. Councillor Sosowski,
Is to speak in favour.
you're the last one.
I am,
So,
thank you. Thank you. I want to stand tonight for this. I can't do this sitting down, so I'm going to stand if that's
Go
right. Thank
ahead.
you. Come. Just feels more comfortable. To everyone in this chamber, and in particular to the councillors sitting around the table here, we have been chosen specifically by our very unique communities to come together as council to do everything that we can do to ensure that our ratepayers and residents are looked after. The community has brought us together with trust and faith and hope that we will carefully consider and commit to funding the repair, the maintenance, and future-proofing upgrades to their assets. The community expects us to do all of this in a balanced way, a way that contemplates everyone's wants and needs, in a way that sorts through the plethora of competing priorities and interests. And all of this whilst keeping their rates as low as possible in an environment where costs are continually increasing. I know that I have worked diligently, inquisitively, and have been open to the community's views on what they think is important and needs to be considered when this budget was being developed. We, with our administration, have worked hard to make sure that issues which are important to our community are being reflected in this budget. With all of the information that we had and all being considered, this is a well-worked, well-considered, balanced and pragmatic budget focused on and for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I think everyone's spoken now. For me, in closing, it's been really interesting to hear some of the issues that councillors have raised tonight. But I will say there has been an entire process where matters could have been raised, and indeed we could have had discussions about how to pay for them. Now we have concerns about a budget that strikes a balance between protecting services and keeping rates as low as possible in a climate of high inflation, higher costs and legacy issues. I'm not saying some of the points are without merit, but hard decisions need to be made, and the process has been undertaken, engaged in good faith by most councillors, and this is a budget that strikes the right balance. I acknowledge that it hasn't been possible to fund all new projects this year, but simply put, we just can't afford everything all at once, particularly given the challenging high inflation environment we find ourselves in. I think this has been said by councillors in the past, it would be a mistake to look at each separate thing in isolation. This budget is prepared as a whole, as a complete document, mindful of the need to protect our core services and maintain our ageing assets while striking a balance of keeping rates low. I implore all councillors to adopt what's in front of us and allow the city to get on with business, to get on with delivering the services upon which our community rely. This is an honest budget. No smoke and mirrors. I'll now put this to the vote. All those in favour? That's Councillor Maleka, Councillor Ostrowski, Councillor Eason, Councillor Sutherland, Deputy Mayor and myself. All those against? Councillor Palmer, Councillor Peterson-Pick, Councillor Bull, Councillor Clark and Councillor Johnson. That is carried. So that's all for this evening. I will close the meeting at 8:25 p.m. Thank you all.